The following takes place between 7 p.m. and 8 p.m.
Welcome to Bottle Episodes, a podcast where we discuss very special episodes of TV shows that focus their action on a single primary location. I'm CJ.
And I'm Courtney.
And today we are discussing the action thriller 24, which aired on Fox from 2001 to 2010. And specifically, this episode is from the 5th season. It's called Day 5, 7 p.m. to 8 p.m. It aired March 13th, 2006.
I love it.
How's it going, Courtney?
It's going. The world is on fire.
It's going.
But it's going. Everything's
The world
happening.
is a trash fire, and we are indoors.
Just a big old dumpster fire outside. Don't go outside, kids. It'll be fine.
I don't know that it'll be fine.
Oh, God. God.
But here we are just, discussing pop culture because what else can we do?
What else can we do? We're just hiding in our blanket forts, talking about 24. It's great. Everything's fine.
You are literally under a blanket for it, and I am inside a closet, so...
We've changed our locations by degrees. We've gone further and further interior. That is what's happening right now.
I want to know what your experience with this show is.
Okay, yeah, fair. So literally, I can boil it down to like a couple things. One, response to 9/11. Two, Dennis Haysbert is the Black president.
Right.
And three, there were like three older Black ladies in my first job who talked about this show with our publisher. I worked for a magazine at the time. And so it was really interesting to me that there were it was cutting across these different divides, right? It was, some workers who were, not that high up on the food chain talking up to the boss about this particular show. And it all felt very like in the zeitgeist.
Wow.
Like people were very much into this show.
Yes,
And
so
watching
oddly, it was like the great unifier
It was like
over at your workplace.
Yeah, like weirdly it was. Like this group of nerds who only wanted to talk about books were obsessed with this show, 24. And I had never watched an episode. Literally up until we started doing this podcast, this episode, I had never seen an actual episode of this show. Like I knew about Kiefer Sutherland. I knew he was in it. I knew what the convention was. I knew that it was broken down by hour and it was 24 hours. So there were 24 episodes in a season, that sort of a thing. Like I understood, but I just never watched it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So what about you? What was your affinity? How were you affiliated with the show? How were you?
Very similar, but also the opposite in that I was one of those insufferable nerds. I was a sophomore in high school when this show started.
Okay.
And, the concept just grabbed me because I was such a sucker for anything that purported to be very innovative and playing with the format. And this was around 2001 when the golden age of television was really starting to formulate and congeal in earnest.
Yep.
And this show was sort of at the forefront of that. In some regards, you couldn't have, Lost or... all these other temporally creative shows like Arrested Development without this show.
Yeah.
So I liked it just because of the unusual form factor. So I was with it from day one. Day one, the first 24-hour day of the show, but also, the pilot episode.
Yeah.
And so, I tended to look at media and pop culture a little more shallowly back then. So the politics of the show were sort of above my head. I just like the explosions. I just like all the fighting and the ticking clock aspect of the show.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until the show became sort of this mainstay in the zeitgeist, critics started really to poke at this show that's so pro-torture and xenophobic. How healthy is this for our media diet? Especially as you mentioned, this is coming right off the heels of 9/11.
Yeah.
And the pilot episode aired 3 weeks after 9/11. So it's not like this show was greenlit in this geopolitical landscape where we're sort of newly, afraid of the unknown and afraid of our neighboring countries. But they certainly capitalized on it as the series progressed.
I can totally understand that. You can definitely see how a show's DNA will change by the the events that are happening around it. It just so happened to be at the right place and the right time. Well, not the right time, but you know what I mean? Like, it just so happened to capture this intense moment, this intense shift in our everyday life. And I think for a lot of folks, this particular show was a weird comfort that, you know, there might be a guy out there like Jack Bauer who is working like he's a man against all of the odds, trying to make sure that, you know, the homeland is safe. You know, like I can imagine how people would take comfort in that. I think of like, you know, how Band of Brothers came out around that same time. And when Band of Brothers came out, it was very much like this comfort knowing that, you know, America, you know, had won World War II, and America, you know, had done all these things by being, you know, very resourceful and very there for each other and working really hard and making tough decisions, but we're in it all together. So there was kind of that aspect of Band of Brothers, but then now we have 24, where it's like, by any means necessary.
It was a fantasy for sure. It was wish fulfillment. It was comfort food, because 9/11 forced us to deal with these really complex political issues that had been going on for decades, and 24 kind of cartoonishly and inappropriately flattened it out and said, don't worry, there's a right and a wrong to this. When as we know,
it's black and white, there's no problems.
Right.
It's all good.
Right. Just stop the bomb, thwart the terrorists, and everything will be okay.
It'll be fine.
So I don't think that you could have had a 24, you know, without a 9/11.
Right.
And yet, another thing that I just want to place on the table before we get into this episode in earnest is that it's remembered as being a very conservative, right-leaning show. And for the most part, that is true. You know, especially when you go over to Homeland, these writers, you know, who came from 24 and then went on to work on Homeland, the politics are mostly the same. But I will say that they allowed for some liberal or progressive friendly shades.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree.
Even
with
in
that.
this episode. So we'll get into that.
Awesome.
But given that this is so heavily serialized, and it's been a hot minute since I've seen the show, you are being introduced to the show.
Yeah.
We'll tee the discussion up with this plot synopsis that I have devised for us.
Perfect.
So the bottle of the week is CTU headquarters. Russian terrorists have released nerve gas into CTU headquarters, causing CTU staffers to perish within seconds of inhaling the gas. The building goes into lockdown. Agent Jack Bauer, his ex, Audrey, his daughter, Kim, Kim's boyfriend, Barry, and several CTU staffers, including tech analyst Chloe, cram themselves into a conference room sealed from the gas. Less lucky is Chloe's colleague, Edgar, who dies in the next room as the survivors watch from a window. They learn that a corrosive agent is eating through the room's protective seal, and they will all die unless someone can get to a computer elsewhere in the building to deactivate a program. Jack tries to reach it, but can't. Only one person can. Lynn McGill, a high-ranking CTU rep whose keycard was stolen and used by the terrorists to spread the nerve gas. McGill, fraught with guilt over his negligence, complies with Jack's request to sacrifice his life by going into a contaminated area to deactivate the software in order to save the survivors. After hearing from Jack that his effort was successful, Lynn dies. Elsewhere in the building, grieving CTU agent Tony plots to kill the man in CTU custody named Henderson, who's responsible for the assassination of Tony's wife. Jack tries to dissuade him, saying that Henderson has vital information that can thwart the terrorists. At the last moment, Tony relents and is promptly attacked by Henderson, who escapes. As Jack mourns Tony's supposed death, the hour draws to a close. And other developments in this hour, weak-willed President Logan considers whether to place Los Angeles under martial law at the behest of his power-hungry Vice President Hal Gardner and against the advice of his wife Martha and Chief of Staff Mike. And Kim Bauer returns to CTU after learning that her father Jack is alive, but pushes him away, saying she can't be a part of his life.
Ooh.
Did you get all that from just like a cold watch?
To be honest, I did. I felt
okay, good.
pretty comfortable with this show. I feel like, I will say this. There are things that I do love about the show's format. First of all, that ticking clock is so satisfying. Oh my God. Like I could see myself getting
That's
addicted.
all the theme song that you need. There's no other theme song to the show.
Yeah,
but
no,
that
just that
beep, beep, it's so iconic.
Oh, it's so good. I'm extremely impressed with how they had to plot the pacing of this show in order to match those time constraints that they had set up.
Yeah, so this is episode 12, I believe, 11 or 12.
Okay, so it's the middle
within
of the
this season. So
then.
we're right in the thick of it.
Yeah.
And in terms of this being a bottle episode, you know, they do the old headquarters is under siege episode, base under siege episode.
And I loved the
it's pretty heavy. Yeah. CTU has never been vulnerable up until this moment. So season 5, it's a pretty good time within the series to pull this shtick.
Okay.
To actually penetrate this sacrosanct base almost.
Yeah.
And just from this being your first episode, did you love Chloe? Did you hate her? Did she make an impact on you either way?
I mean, I felt like she was kind of annoying, but I could definitely tell that she was like a fan favorite. And you can kind of see it in the way that Jack is interacting with her as well. Like, you can tell that she's someone he relies on, that, you know, is very close to him. You know, he's like, I need you to get back to work. And you know,
I mean, like, she's his ride or die till the end.
I can tell. I mean, you can tell. You can 100% tell that, because he's not, you know, from what if you have any inkling about this show at all, you know that, of course, Jack Bauer is a guy who gets results. And, you know, typically Jack Bauer would be the guy like yelling and berating and screaming, probably. Maybe not yelling and berating and screaming, but, you know, just very much willing to apply.
We'll say barking.
Barking, but he would very much apply pressure in a situation, but you could also see him holding back in maybe more brusque tactics he would have used, right?
Right.
So you can tell that Chloe is like a fan favorite. People like her. What are your feelings about Chloe? Yeah.
Well, Chloe and Edgar kind of were doing this comedy duo act all season.
Okay.
When she wasn't Jack's Girl Friday, she was kind of like off on her own. So I think the writers were experimenting with pairing her up and giving her another like comic foil to play with. Okay. And so to like mercilessly kill off this puppy dog character was a shock in and of itself. No. And then giving Chloe this like hugely dramatic beat to play with was a really like cool, impactful writing choice. So at the top of this episode, she is kind of uncharacteristically not in the game. And I think that could almost cloud your judgment of Chloe if this is like your introduction to her. This is almost so uncharacteristic to the point where it stretches credibility, which is a running theme with the show. The writers do a lot of things that stretch credibility for the sake of achieving something else, you know, so they're trapped in a room. We need to amp the stakes up right away, where Chloe is suddenly in this catatonic state, and that gives Kim's boyfriend Barry something to do. So this all seems kind of devised to sort of amp up the Jack and Kim drama, because also prior to this episode, Kim came back after a long absence to confront her dad, whom she thought had died, but in fact, he just faked his death for bullshit 24 reasons. So you're getting this like much needed father-daughter reunion.
Right.
And do you know who Kim's boyfriend's played by? Did you recognize him?
No, I didn't, but I do really quickly want to say that it was really jarring to see the girl from Happy Endings as Jack Bauer's daughter. Like, my brain went, oh my God, it's a whole girl from Happy Endings. Like, I couldn't believe it for half a second. But who is the boyfriend?
Well, now that you mention her, Alicia Cuthbert, I think that she broke onto the scene with this show. Before then, I knew her as being one of the Midnight Society on Are You Afraid of the Dark? And she was also in like this horrible torture porn horror movie called Captivity. So she's been around, and she's a really reliable actor. Yeah,
she's really steady. I did appreciate her very much in this episode.
Yeah. And I think that the writers really saddled her with some truly unforgivable shit first and second season. Okay. So I think that she was right to protect her career and say like, peace, I'm out of here.
Yeah, I'm not doing this. Yeah.
Yeah. So she makes her, dutiful special guest star appearance in this episode. And her boyfriend is played by C. Thomas Howell, who played Ponyboy in The Outsiders in 1983.
Whoa.
His character, Barry, is sort of this stand-in. He's the liberal wet blanket.
Yes.
He's the one who's trying to take care of everyone's feelings.
Absolutely.
He's the foil to Jack. And and his presence in this situation are the writers basically saying there's no use for this sort of like liberal gray area.
Oh,
let's
yeah.
just let's talk about the situation.
There's no time. There's no time.
There's no time.
We got to get it done, Barry.
For that.
You know, not to jump to the end here, but we do see expressions of emotion like once this is all done. You know, we do see Jack Bauer have his moments of, oh God, this is bad, or oh, I'm having a really hard time right now, or we even see him crying at one point. So
it's never that there's no time for emotion. There's a lot of soap opera style emoting on this show, for sure.
A lot of soap opera stuff, yes.
But it's kind of funny that they bring in this like easy breezy, perfects and therapist character to sort of poke fun at the notion that there's no time really for debrief on this show.
And even at one point, Chloe even goes, does all he ever do tell you to breathe? Like she like immediately,
what's with you in the breathing?
She just like, turns on him, and I'm like, oh wow, Chloe, okay.
She is truly a curmudgeonly ball of sunshine on this show.
It's delightful.
Really
it's delightful. And earlier when I was saying that like she was annoying to me, it wasn't her because, you know, I am a mushy lefty liberal nonsense person. I immediately was like, oh no, she needs time, give her time. So it wasn't like the fact that she was in shock that made me go like, oh. It was
the sass.
It was like the sass. I was like, oh, all right. let's do this. Let's leap right in.
Fair. But you know, you need a Chloe, especially on a show like this. One of my hot takes that I really want to tease out during this is that I think that 24 really has its roots in horror and is written like a horror narrative to me.
I agree. I 100% agree with that.
It's
actually
more than just an action thriller.
Yeah.
It's designed almost like with sadist intent and the same kind of like fun sadism that I experience when I watch something like Nightmare on Elm Street or Scream or the Child's Play movies. Just that there's so much pervasive death around the choices that these characters make and the traumas that they have to endure. And I want to keep coming back to that. But the reason I bring that up now is just that I'm thankful to the writers for including that sidekick comic relief character.
Oh yeah, no, you
because they didn't necessarily have to do
attention.
that, right?
Yeah, you need someone to break the tension. You need
Right.
somebody to, you know, just be funny and fussy and have a moment and kind of put Jack Bauer in his place. Like I 100% understand that. Like that weird exchange between Kim and Chloe, that was really interesting. Kardashian. It was just really funny because I could feel almost like Jack has a work daughter and Jack has a real daughter, and the work daughter is kind of trying to, exactly like Kim said, condescend a little bit.
That is so well put. That's so
really
true.
Interesting.
Right.
Yeah.
And I love that most of the people around Chloe either ignore her or leave her alone. And I love that Kim Bauer came in with that history. You know, she's been there since day one, right?
Yeah.
She just says flat out, don't talk down to me, Chloe. That was such a beautiful exchange. Kim Bauer really gets short shrift on this show. And I thought that it was maybe a mistake for the writers to bring her in. If they only had the actress for 2 episodes, that they bring her in on an episode like this where there's not much for her to do and she's basically just like sitting around. I thought that Alicia Cuthbert did well in making the most out of those like quiet side chat moments.
Yeah, but it definitely speaks to that whole concept of the male lead needs some sort of emotional stakes. And for him, obviously, you know, it's not just enough to have CTU being attacked and colleagues dying. There needs to be more emotional stakes, and what better emotional stakes than a female familial character to be involved somehow, you know?
Of course, right. And at this point in the show, yes. Oh, for sure. And this show is so full of shortcuts. Yeah. I think that at this point, it was really fascinating for the writers and for Jack to acknowledge how much he had lost as a character. And this is another way that it's like a horror movie where the characters are defined by what they've lost and how things will never be the same. And her presence is like a good reminder of that. So in terms of, you know, the overall Jack Bauer arc, it was lovely to check in with her and see her again. But I want to kind of make an abrupt pivot to the man of the hour, Lynn McGill, played by Sean Astin.
Oh my God, Samwise Gamgee, here to save the day.
So this is sort of like his, redemption story. He's been like a little twat this whole time, but here he comes to save the day. I want to know your thoughts about this.
Oh, yeah. So I definitely... One, he admitted, hey, my key card got stolen because I got beaten up and I was embarrassed. I didn't want to tell anybody. Again, back to that idea of feelings causing, some sort of disruption or, just not getting in the way of getting the job done. And we have this, poor, I'm assuming it's a janitor, a security guard.
He's a security guard. And what's funny is that he's a non-character. He's just like a background character who's elevated to this status. He's literally wearing a red shirt.
Yes. Okay. Yes, absolutely. He's 100% wearing a red shirt. But it was just so funny to me because he has this moment of like, why didn't you say anything? And it was just like immediately I heard, if you see something, say something. Like it immediately clicked in my head that was what was going on. But it was just so funny to me that, we have this, like you said, red shirt who's basically kind of like, externalizing what exactly is going to happen. Like I knew the minute they had that exchange where Sean Astin is like, hey, I was embarrassed and I didn't want to, give up I didn't want anybody to know that I had gotten beaten up and I didn't want anybody to know basically that I was weak. Like that's really what he was saying. I wasn't man enough in this moment because America. But like,
right.
The minute they started having that conversation, I was like, oh, Sean Astin is going to die in this episode. Like had no context.
They telegraphed that pretty well. It's always nice when 24 makes space for those relatable feels, like being embarrassed, wanting to save face. But of course, in 24 parlance, if you're not man enough to handle it like Jack Bauer would, you gotta die. You're
gonna have to sacrifice yourself heroically to redeem yourself in any way, shape, or form. And also, this red shirt dies.
Right.
Presumably for being like real mad about this whole thing.
What's kind of funny is that I guess this is kind of a huge spoiler for Stranger Things. If you haven't seen it, turn away now.
Oh yeah.
But his arc on Stranger Things is almost virtually identical.
Yeah.
From being like the twat to nobly sacrificing himself.
Okay, but here's the thing. I didn't have any issues with him in Stranger Things, not to get wildly off track. I thought he was fine. He was just there being a, dude who's dating your mom and you don't like
but
it.
He's new, so we don't like him. Yeah.
We don't like him, even though he's Samwise Gamgee. Sorry, I will never get off of that horse.
Tying his arc to how the 24 writers are masters of tension, do you tend to do this thing where if a character has to hold their breath, you hold your breath too? Because I do that.
Yes,
you do that. Did you do that during this episode? Because there were multiple instances of characters holding their breath. And I'm like, these 24 writers always leaving me at the edge of my seat where I already know the outcome of this episode. And I'm still like,
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, if someone is holding their breath, I don't know if it's a sympathetic thing. I don't know how many other people do this, but I feel like it's a common thing where if someone on screen is holding their breath, you try to hold your breath too.
Right.
Just to see
you kind of want to see,
through.
Right. Like, how long would you last in that situation? That kind of thing. I did think that, yes, 24 always succumbs to video game logic, but I did think that it was especially egregious in this episode where the conceit is that once he opens that door, the airlock or the room will no longer be hermetically sealed.
Yeah.
It just seemed like a regular old office.
Yeah.
I'm like, really? Yeah. You're telling me that door is airtight? I believe that the conference room was airtight. I did not believe that this weird random meeting room was airtight. No. So that felt a little bit like the floor is lava to me.
Basically. I'm like, this is a storage room. Like, what? Right. Why would this be locked like this? Like, why would it be sealed like this?
But there's no time for that kind of rumination on 24.
No, there's no time. And that is a benefit to the writers. The writers are definitely taking advantage of the fact that there's just no time. There's no time. Like they're just taking advantage of that all of the time with their writing.
Another abrupt pivot. Do you want to talk about this president who is sort of just like this mealy-mouthed puppet? And he keeps listening to his power-hungry vice president. I don't see any parallels to reality at all.
I mean, there's a tiny part of me. No, there isn't a tiny part of me. I wrote it in my notes. Hal seems like Cheney. Like,
right. I mean, 100%.
Hal is Cheney, and then
ding,
also
ding.
his name is Hal, and also played by an actor whose
Ray Wise
eyebrows,
from Twin Peaks.
Yes, his eyebrows do a lot of evil heavy lifting.
Oh, truly.
So for me, like, just seeing his face, I was like, oh, he's the bad guy. Like, in my notes,
Right.
it says he is the bad guy.
Oh, he bad.
And
yes.
they like barely said anything. Like, he barely did anything, and I'm like, oh, he the bad dude.
Right.
And then there was, right, Martha's the wife of the
Yes,
president.
the illustrious Jean Smart.
Jean Smart, who love her. The minute they said her name was Martha, I was like, oh, like Martha, like Washington? Like, my brain immediately went to, oh, she's good. She's great. She's the one with the actual power, that sort of a thing.
More or less, yeah. She kind of comes on the scene, as far as I can recall, as sort of like the unstable wife. This show also was not kind to women. It was not kind to women.
It was 2001, so
right. Feminism didn't start happening until last year.
It just started. We just started
it just
marching,
came up out of nowhere.
It's been great ever since.
No, but to your point, they sort of walk back from that, or they start to really like nuance that. And even though she starts as the unstable wife, we definitely see that Charles Logan, the weak-willed president, is sort of like the true evil. And I think that this was the writer's response specifically to the criticisms that it was so in the tank for conservative politics. And then this arc is specifically them going, you know what? We can sort of make these very blunt allusions to the problematic Bush regime as well. And so, we had a lot of fun with that. And spoiler alert, President Logan ends up becoming the big bad for this season.
Okay, yeah. So I did read ahead a little bit on the Wikipedia about the rest of the season. And I just thought it was really interesting because we have been talking about quote unquote weak men in this episode, right? We've been talking about the Feely psychologist. We've been talking about,
right,
Sean
Lynn,
Astin getting,
right, saving face. Yes, so that is a theme, correct.
Face. And now we have this president who is like, I think it's the right thing and I'm doing the right thing and blah, 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 blah. And I'm doing it because it's the right thing to do. And it's very clearly like the wrong decision. And it is making him weak. You can see that he's a weak person. So it's really interesting them talking about all this weakness, especially when we start to get towards the end of the episode and this character of Tony, who I am assuming, based on, the reaction from Jack Bauer, that he is dead, and I think you said that he is in fact not dead.
This is essentially a death, and then he comes back in a soap operatic twist in season 7. So for the most part, as far as we know for years, like this is his death scene.
He's been dead. Okay, yeah. So, but Jack's reaction, like holding and sobbing, like I can understand that it's an emotional day, but like you can tell based on the way that they have framed this that Tony is an important character.
And we fucking love Tony. I mean, like when I was in high school, there was like a website called TonyAlmeidaIsAwesome.com. And it was a fan site just dedicated to this guy. Yeah, so a lot of feels, not just from Jack, but from the audience. Yeah, I know, right? Bring back GeoCities. Give the people what they want.
One page devoted to their fandom that is nothing but clip art and like shooting stars on the page.
I mean, I love Facebook fan pages, but it's just not the same.
I just want one person shouting into the void about their love for like television. Like that's what I want. But anyway, so like even Tony's death is kind of like a commentary on weak men because very clearly like his wife has died and I did read and figure out that his wife was like a major character as well.
Yeah. We love Michelle too.
And so like, he is another facet of like male weakness on this show. Like he couldn't wait for Jack to get there, or he did, or he hesitated or whatever. And he, in a, like you said, horror style twist, gets stabbed by our, big bad of the episode. And so it's just, it's really interesting to see all of these moments of quote unquote weakness.
Now that's
receiving
interesting.
Such intense reactions from the show.
So I want to clarify what moment of Tony's arc in this episode are you saying is sort of weak, either by your standards or by the writer's standards? Is it that he was so overcome with wanting revenge for Michelle's death that he almost killed this guy? Or was it him relenting and letting Jack sort of talk him down from that ledge?
I think it was his desire for revenge.
Right.
Weirdly.
I think so too. No, I think you're right. And I think that
because he wouldn't have been in that room if he didn't want it so bad. Like
right.
Did he kill the first guy, like the doctor that he was originally in the room with? Did he kill that guy?
I think he just placed him into a chokehold or something.
Okay. Yeah. But he went to pretty extreme measures to get at this guy who killed his wife.
Right. I mean, this show, it had a huge undercurrent of toxic masculinity before we had that phrase.
Yeah, this was a dad show. Watching this show, I'm like, this is a dad show. Not my dad. My dad, I don't think he was too interested in this. He was too busy watching The Shield. But speaking of toxic masculinity, but I think of, Kim telling her dad, hey, man, I'm not really that interested in continuing our relationship. And it felt like this show was coming from the perspective of the dad who has heard that news during Thanksgiving, where the daughter's like, I don't want to talk about politics with you at the Thanksgiving dinner table. I'm not coming. I'm not coming back for Thanksgiving. That is what this show felt like to me in that moment.
I think what's great is these cutaways to Kim when all of this is going on around her and she is just there as a visitor. It is kind of like this inevitability of fate that she just happens to visit her dad and then, she's caught in this life-threatening lockdown situation.
She literally says to him, every time I'm around you, people start dying. And I just can't. She nopes out of it. And I am 100% on her side. I am 100% Team Kim.
100%.
I'm going to say it. Controversy time. Courtney Jones, 100% Team Kim.
I'm right there with you. I love the actress. It's hard for me to say that I love the character, but I think I love the actress more than the character, to be honest. Yeah. You just feel it. You feel that I think that she loves Jack, but she only sees him as a toxic presence in her life. And I think there's that push-pull between I see that you're doing good, I just can't be around you. And I think
this is not safe or healthy for me. I'm putting up a boundary.
Yes, exactly. You are not a safe space for me. I love you, but nope.
I ain't doing this. I'm not coming home for Thanksgiving.
And so in terms of, now that we're putting it into these terms, Jack, kind of acquiesces to Barry in the end. So the liberal therapist kind of wins that round insofar as that it's some kind of competition. But of course, to Jack, everything's a competition,
it's
right?
A dad show.
Yes. So I would say that Ponyboy won this round.
Stay gold, Ponyboy.
Right. What else? Do you have anything else to say about? I feel like we've been dancing around this issue of the fact that they're battling a nerve gas, and it's this airborne toxin. We don't have to belabor the point. We didn't choose this episode because it was about a nerve gas or an airborne toxin. But I guess in terms of it being a bottle episode, I did love. Again, this is the 24 writers being such experts at tension. That the episode is about them being trapped in a room, and then the mini problem of the episode rests on that gas leaking into the bottle, right?
Right. And what I will say this, I really loved that it was multiple bottles. We had, that conference room, we had that, storeroom that apparently has an airlock tight seal on it, and then we also had that medical bay. So we had 3 different explicit bottles within this episode. Granted, there's a larger bottle of just CTU headquarters itself, but that was really interesting to see that playing out. And then I will also just say, throwing it way back to when we were talking about the logistics of this show, the logistics were so clear on what the parameters were. You're in each of these rooms because they have the seal. Here is the amount of time it's going to take for help to arrive. It was all extremely laid out. And that was very pleasant to me. I loved that. And I'm like, if every episode is this clear, fabulous.
Right. No, agree. Again, that comes from like the strength of the writers approaching each situation with a video game like logic, where the rules are made very clear. I'm now drawing a parallel between this and Alias's bottle episode, which I covered with my good friend Liz Pollitt on this podcast. And I remember saying on that episode that I didn't even realize that Alias's episode was a bottle episode, because they're kind of free to roam about the cabin to a certain extent in that episode. And they're kind of making up BS rules as they go along. In this episode, the rules in terms of, how much time they have left, what the nerve gas is going to do, why it's doing it, which rooms it's getting to. I'm not saying that it's realistic or even logical, but does it make its own kind of sense in that moment for this sort of like problem, cause, solution, narrative thrust? Absolutely. And I loved it.
Yeah. And even down to like when Jack has to crawl through that, that what is it, air vent or whatever, he crawls through and he drops into another room and all that kind of stuff, and he has to like seal the door, and you hear Chloe tell him, we will have, if you didn't seal that properly, we have only 3 minutes. Like that was an interesting detail to me.
Right.
That jumped out to me as like, oh, they really, really planned this portion out.
Yes.
I do want to ask really quickly, because I feel like we have talked about 1,000 aspects of this show, but we have not actually talked about Jack Bauer himself.
Let's talk about him.
Like,
such a complicated figure.
A black and white guy, but operating in a lot of moral gray, right? I don't know what to say. Like you talk about video game logic a lot. He, to me, does feel like an early 90s PC game character. PC is in, computer.
Personal computing. Yes.
But I remember this game, I think it was called like Lode Runner or something like that, but I used to play, it was like one game on my compact Presario from 1995 that we had. And there was just this guy who ran around and did a lot of like actions, but you had no real, like he had no discernible features. He had like no real personality. He was just a little figure that ran from, event to event trying to solve problems, right? That's how Jack Bauer feels to me. Like I did not really get much of his personality, and I correct me if I'm wrong, he doesn't really feel like he has much of a personality. It feels like he is a gameplay character who is set out to do all of these things, and there is a world built around him that is more interesting than he is.
Yes,
is that
and
just
no.
my interpretation from this episode?
I think that's a fair
something
interpretation just from seeing this episode, but also I will say yes and no. Okay. So one, I think in terms of the decisions that he makes, he is very much a computer game character in that I can imagine the writers have a relatively easy time figuring out what he would and wouldn't do, right? He's going to do the thing that no one else would do because most people would either shy away from the situation or have a pleasant little discussion about it. And he's going to roll his sleeves up and do the damn thing. And that's what makes him such an effective television character. In terms of him not having much of a personality, I think that comes down to Kiefer Sutherland giving him this, weight, this gravity. And I do think it comes out, especially in an episode like this, where he's having the people that he cares about in his life, Kim, his ex Audrey, and then Chloe. So like the 3 women in his life, he's having to sort of confront the ugly decisions that he's made in this episode. You get that hauntedness from everything that he does. And that is the kind of television personality and television performance that I love watching. I'm going to draw an unlikely parallel to Ted Danson's character on Cheers, because I know. Oh, stick with me. I'm going to
follow you on this journey. Yeah.
Because I see the same kind of hauntedness in his performance as well. He's keeping the engine running from day to day in that Boston bar, but just how he's talking to Shelley Long and how he's trying to manage, all of this that's going on around him. Hijinks is the word I'm looking for. You see that undeniable hauntedness where he's just sort of, it's like death by 1,000 paper cuts. He's just tired. He's exhausted. And that's what I pick up on a more nuanced level from a moment to moment aspect with Jack. So decision-wise, is he pretty simple? Yeah. Not a very wide character necessarily, but I would argue a deep one.
Okay, I mean, that's legit. That's totally legit.
And as long as you're bringing up, this mournful moment over Tony's body, this season in particular was very marked by huge deaths. In fact, I think it holds the show's record for most deaths of major characters in one season.
Jeez.
Huge spoiler alerts coming up. Dennis Haysbert's character dies very unceremonious.
No.
I know. And I read that he did not want to do it.
I believe it.
The actor was like, "Are you kidding me? You're bringing me back to do this
just to murder me?"
Yeah.
That's ridiculous.
Right. And so this is tying back to 24 as this relentless, not action or drama or soap opera, but a horror narrative to me, is that the proceedings are marked by death and fatalism and just like a wrongness. And I also want to tie that to its conservative politics. Because I read something really interesting in Stephen King's Danse Macabre book. Now, he wrote this in the 70s and 80s and gave a brief update in 2006. He insists that the horror genre is kind of at its roots a very conservative genre. That we see that changing now, obviously, now as in the past 5 years. But historically, it's been a very conservative genre because it relentlessly concerns itself with the wrongness of things, right?
Yeah.
That things have to get back to a status quo. So you have like the family unit in narratives like Poltergeist, right? Or of course, this like the purity test, right? Only the virgin can win, because the horror genre has historically been a fight for the status quo. And now we see that changing, of course, with Jordan Peele and Get Out and Us.
There's
the
more
upcoming
commentary
Candyman.
shifting
Yes, because now I think as a society, oh my gosh, there's like a high school sophomore word. I think society is finally getting its just desserts. But no, I think
gotta change.
Right.
Yeah.
As a culture, we're seeing that fuck the status quo, right? And that's why you're seeing more progressive voices enter the horror realm. It's for that reason.
Right. And I agree with that assessment. I think that's really interesting.
Any final thoughts before we rate this episode?
I think it was good for me to try something different, to try something new, to go back and look at 24. This is a show I definitely would not qualify as a Courtney show, but it was good for me. It was good for me in ways that I did not expect it to be. It was good for me in that I loved the very clear plotting and the clear logistics work that went into making this particular show.
That's fair.
Yeah, that's
and so given that it was like good for you, like solid, a palatable hour of television, all told, how full would this make your bottle? 100% being the fullest.
I think this would put me at, for this not necessarily being my cup of tea, I would put this at a 78, like a high C.
Okay, yeah.
In terms of like logistics and layout, in terms of how it feels as a bottle episode, the claustrophobia, them trying to work together to get out of something, I would even put it at an 84%. Low B, a BC, BC. Let's just call it an even 80 and be done.
I appreciate that both you and I were honors students in high school, and so we take these percentage points very seriously.
We do.
And we know that there is a huge gulf between 78 and 80 and 84, truly. So
exactly.
So
100%.
I feel it when you say 80%. I think that's totally fair given everything.
What about you?
So yeah, I jotted a line down here in my notes. It's not from this season even, it's from season 2, but it always rang in my head. A character barks at Jack, it's complicated. It's actually Dennis Haysbert's wife on the show, the evil first lady.
Oh, of course.
Yes, right. Of course, she's a Lady Macbeth. And she barks at him, "It's complicated, Jack." And he says, "No, it's simple." And that's kind of like the prevailing ethos of the show. For better or worse, there's just so much talking and analyzing, and Jack is a doer. And on television, in this storytelling medium that is made up of decisions and choices and real-time, in-the-moment actions, of course, that is the philosophy that always wins, and that's what makes it such gripping television. But when you apply those philosophies to reality, it of course begins to really fall apart and not have that much currency. So all of these things that we're talking about with 24 in terms of it being an amazing show in terms of tension and storytelling and narrative thrust and its conservative politics and its secret roots in the horror genre, they're all connected. And Jack Bauer is sort of at that epicenter. This is all to say that he is an amazing television character, but in the prevailing pattern of amazing television characters, he would be a shit actual person.
Legit.
He would be insufferable.
Legit, yeah.
So that's sort of my assessment of Jack the character and this episode, because this episode is kind of emblematic of how the show functions as a whole. It's a good indicator of what the best of 24 has to offer. So I would give it a 90%, a solid A-.
Okay. All right. That's legit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And now that ticking clock is just ringing in my head, which means the hour is coming to a close. So this has been Bottle Episodes. If you have an idea for a bottle episode from television history that we should cover, or if you're trapped in a single primary location and need to send a distress call, email podcastbottleepisodes@gmail.com. That's podcastbottleepisodes@gmail.com. Till next time, say bye, Courtney.
Bye, everybody.
Peace.